If there's one thing that's becoming really apparent about the difference between PlayStation and Xbox, is that they're going to approach the future in completely polar opposite ways, with Xbox being one to open their games and their platform to as many devices as possible, and PlayStation sticking to more traditional console models of basically releasing exclusives so that people can only play their games on the device that they release. And nothing further spotlights that than this recent report from Bloomberg's Jason Schreier, who heard from sources that Sony's apparently planning to pull back from PlayStation games being released on PC. They're going back to full-on exclusives for PlayStation. Now, that's not to say that every single PlayStation published title will be exclusive to PlayStation 5. If it is an online game, a live service, the kind of game that requires as many players as humanly possible, for games like Marathon and Marvel Tokon, those kinds of titles will still be multi-platform, or at the very least, come to both PlayStation and PC. But when it comes to single-player titles such as last year's samurai hit Ghost of Yotei and the upcoming action game Seros, those will remain exclusive to PlayStation 5. And this was such a hard pivot that apparently Ghost of Yotei was actually close to being finished for the PC, only for plans surrounding that to be completely ditched. Who knows, maybe Sony and PlayStation will allow them to go back to that if plans change down the line. But right now, apparently, all the development time and resources poured into that Ghost of Yotei PC port that was near completion will all go to waste. Now, some upcoming PlayStation games that are getting PC ports did manage to slip through the cracks. So, for example, Death Stranding 2 and Kena, Scars of Cosmora, are all seeing a PC release this year. But the difference with those two games is that those are second-party titles, in that while they were published by PlayStation and had PlayStation's aid, those are development studios who are not owned by PlayStation, and so maybe they'll have more freedom to decide whether their games will come to PC after a certain limited exclusivity time on PlayStation. But yeah, imagine that upcoming highly anticipated PlayStation titles such as Wolverine, as well as, Intergalactic from Naughty Dog. Both of those will likely be exclusive to PlayStation 5, won't see a PC version if these recent change in plans stick. Though Bloomberg emphasizes right here that things could change in the future, things aren't predictable in the video game industry, and Sony's plans are constantly shifting. Now, I think for many, this came as a surprise because initially it seemed like this was all very beneficial for Sony and PlayStation, with reports that their PC ports were actually selling really well. But it seemed as though that was only once upon a time because, according to Bloomberg, based on what sources have relayed to this news outlet, recent PlayStation games have not sold well on PC. Apparently, what extra boost in sales for a game might happen on PC is not good enough to offset the fact that people no longer have to buy a PlayStation. They can just wait things out and wait for the PC port of a PlayStation release title. And what that does is damage the ability for PlayStation as a console to be able to sell. Or as Bloomberg puts it right here, there are concerns internally from a faction within PlayStation that releasing their games on PC risks damaging the console's brand and will hurt sales of the PlayStation 5 and its successors. By releasing their games on PC just a couple months to a year down the line, they're giving the PC platform more power. It's diminishing PlayStation as a brand because it is no longer necessary. If you really want to play a PlayStation game, you can technically wait and play it on a device that is more universal, such as a personal computer. It seemed as though initially the games are selling well enough where that trade-off was worth it, but with recent PC releases of PlayStation games not having sold as well as Sony and PlayStation would have liked, that trade-off is suddenly not becoming as worth it as it used to be. And I mean, Sony releasing their PlayStation games on PC has been going on for a while, with them starting this back in 2020 when they pivoted and began bringing games to personal computers, specifically using the Steam platform. And worth noting is that anyone who sells games on Steam have to give away 30% of that revenue to Steam, and that cut does diminish for Steam if a game reaches certain thresholds in terms of units sold or how much money it's made overall. But yeah, the advantage of Sony releasing their games exclusively on PlayStation isn't just better for selling PlayStation consoles and for keeping their games in one ecosystem and giving their brand power. Financially speaking, when their games are sold on PlayStation, they get to keep 100% of the revenue. And then beyond that, another way they stand to profit is that when somebody gets a PlayStation, not only do those PlayStation exclusive games see 100% of the revenue go to PlayStation. There's also the fact that the PlayStation Store, because it takes a cut of any game sold through that platform, basically anyone who gets a PlayStation console like a PS5 or the upcoming PS6, 30% of any games they buy through this platform, Sony and PlayStation get to keep. So getting a new customer to play on PlayStation isn't just about the exclusives, it's also about all of the recurrent revenue and monetization that can happen through the sales of third-party games as well. There's something to be said about convincing someone to buy a PlayStation and buying their games on that platform and kind of pulling them away from PC versus trying to just push more units for PlayStation published titles on PC. Where the 30% of every game sold through PlayStation per user who adopts PlayStation, the revenue of that might outweigh the volume of sales that happen on Steam when it comes to a PlayStation exclusive title coming to Steam and then having to give 30% of those sales to Steam. And then on top of that, those games not selling as well as maybe they once did before. When you think about it, the loss of a PlayStation customer, losing someone in terms of them buying a PlayStation console and using it as their main way to game, is a loss of not just the 100% of revenue they get to keep from their exclusives, but all the 30% revenue from every single game that that PlayStation user buys using that console. It's that kind of revenue potential from software that allows Sony and PlayStation to subsidize consoles like PlayStation 5 and the upcoming PlayStation 6 and whatnot. It's what allows them to sell their hardware at a cheaper price point in relation to the hardware and the computing components that are packed within their console. They're selling PlayStations at a loss so that they can make it back through software sales and through the 30% revenue cut that they get from all the third-party games that are sold as part of the requirements of selling games on the PlayStation Store. So yeah, the end result is that Sony is looking to take a more straightforward approach, going back to console exclusives. And then another aspect that might have influenced this decision and how Sony believes that not going back to full exclusive might potentially damage the PlayStation brand and its power and its relevance is the way competition like Xbox is approaching their next-gen console, which is going to be a PC console hybrid that is not only going to be able to play Xbox games, but also just function as a PC, which means you can download all the other PC launchers, Steam, Epic, GOG, you name it, and play those games as well. And so if Sony continues to release their games on Steam, that means that Xbox's next-gen console titled Project Helix will technically be able to play PlayStation consoles once they come out on PC, and that's something that Sony doesn't want. They don't want to give competition the ability to leverage Sony and PlayStation's name and their games and their exclusives in order to be able to market their product as something that can play the competition's titles as well. And then there's the fact that the Steam Machine is coming out as well, and that's basically like a consoleized version of a PC, a more convenient way for PC gaming. And the Steam Machine can also claim that it can play PlayStation titles, and so all of this is essentially diluting the necessity for a PlayStation, and that means the potential of Sony and PlayStation losing console sales that in turn lose them the 30% revenue that they get for every game sold per PlayStation owner and customer who buy games on that platform. Meanwhile, Xbox is taking the complete opposite approach, as Ashish Sharma stated right here with Project Helix's codename announcement for this next-gen Xbox, that Ashish Sharma confirmed will lead in performance and play your Xbox and PC games. As for which approach will win, well, I think that Sony and PlayStation's first-party IPs have enough power as brands and IPs, and they're in high enough demand that they'll still be able to get away with being able to not ship their games on PC. And I believe that that will make people buy PlayStations because they know that certain highly coveted new games and upcoming projects such as Wolverine and Intergalactic and other upcoming titles can only be played on this console, and there's no more leeway to be able to just wait things out until they're able to play it on PC while they play other games in the meantime. Whereas with Xbox, while I do think that their game sales will be the best they've ever been due to the fact that Xbox's first-party games will be just very accessible. You can play it on just about any console, including PlayStation, with iconic Xbox IPs like Halo going to PlayStation as well. I do believe that when it comes to hardware, Xbox is basically irrelevant as a brand. Xbox is starting to become more of like a Sega kind of situation where they're a publisher of first-party games, but because of the ability to play it on any console or any device, it means that Xbox as a platform just won't have as much relevance. And whether Sony and PlayStation's move is a good or bad thing depends on perspective. If you're all about games being as accessible as possible and being on as many platforms as possible, then it's going to suck that Sony and PlayStation are deciding to forego releasing their PlayStation exclusive games on PC down the line. From a business and brand prowess perspective, though, Sony and PlayStation's strategy makes sense, especially with the approach that competitors such as Project Helix and Steam Machine, if you can kind of see it as a competitor, given their approach of allowing any game that comes out on PC being playable on their platform and kind of essentially creating a more open ecosystem, it makes sense that PlayStation, from a business perspective, wouldn't want to give them more leeway, more power to be able to use PlayStation's games as a means to advertise their products as the one-stop shop for any game you want to play from any platform. And what this also means is that Sony and PlayStation no longer have to put time and resources and money into a PC port, and they can just make everything a lot more focused on just the PlayStation platform and consoles and hardware and the software that fills that ecosystem. And this model is still alive and well if you look at the way Nintendo is doing things and how they've continued to be juggernauts in the games industry, with the Nintendo Switch 2 being the fastest selling game console in the history of the games industry, in the history of games, period. And that happened through a combination of compelling hardware with software that takes full advantage of that hardware. And because Nintendo knows that their games are not coming out on PC down the line, they can make their games fully around the unique hardware that is something like the Nintendo Switch 2 and take full advantage of its features and keep everything focused in-house and make it so that people have to buy a Nintendo Switch 2 in order to play those exclusive titles, with a lot of the coveted Nintendo IPs being something that a lot of folks can't resist, and PlayStation's basically pursuing that tactic and that model and that strategy that has been the traditional way of doing consoles since, many, many years. But it's going to suck for people for whom those PlayStation PC ports were really convenient and did make those games a lot more accessible. And also, their PCs allow them to take full advantage of PC features such as, being able to set the resolution that you want, graphic settings, the ability to mod these games, and, ultra widescreen support, so on and so forth. There are all of these advantages that the PC ports offer if you have the hardware to handle those advantages that will be sorely missed. And so yeah, whether this is a good move or a bad move, whether this is something to praise or admonish PlayStation for, will ultimately depend on just perspective and what you want out of PlayStation. But yeah, that's kind of the rundown of PlayStation's future plans based on information that news outlet Bloomberg heard from their sources. Let me know in the comments below what your thoughts and opinions are on all of this. Do you think that PlayStation and Sony are making the right move? Are you surprised by this? Or are you like, this was a long time coming? Does it make sense that they're pursuing this path? And do you personally feel like this is a shitty move on the part of Sony and PlayStation? Or is it one that you're like, it's understandable? Share with us your take on all of this in the comments below. And to be further updated on all things gaming news, reviews, and discussions, stay tuned right here on Young Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Young out.